Hi, my name is Moshe Kindler, and I'm the publisher of The Jewish Link,
Hi, this is Elizabeth Kratz. I'm editor of The Jewish Link.
and you're on the Jewish Link Pitch Meeting podcast. So, Elizabeth, you're hard at work on the third annual Jewish Link Wine Guide, okay? And it's a pleasure to be here. I know actually we're taking away work. You're actually supposed to be working on the Wine Guide. We decided to take a break and film this episode of the Pitch Meeting, and I couldn't think of anyone else better to invite, and please tell us about our guest.
Okay, thank you. Our first guest, specifically related to the Jewish Link Wine Guide, is no better than Yossie Horwitz, who is our founding judge of the Jewish Link Wine Guide, now concluding its third wrap-up, and we're about to launch our third magazine. And you have a beautiful and great history in wine as a hobbyist initially, and we definitely wanted for you to just tell us about yourself. And the Jewish Link Pitch Meeting is really just to highlight you and talk about all the amazing things that you've accomplished in your life so far.
Okay.
We could be here a while.
Yeah. So I'm 5'9.5".
Not that far back.
Not that far back. Well, that's what I am now. So
How long have you been 5'9"?
Actually, I just want to cut in before
5'10".
Yossie launches. I just want to say that it's funny. We've probably known each other for about 14, 15 years, and our first interaction was at an organization called Leket. Yossie and I have mutual friends in common, and Yossie helped me get started the Leket Israel Wine Club, okay, which I think was one of his second foray besides Yossie's Corkboard, which he'll tell you about. And we had a great time doing it, and I learned a lot about the business of wine and about Yossie. So, really, I'm actually personally happy to see you here.
The best thing you learned was not to go into wine as a business, which is why you found yourself here and not running a wine show or a wine club. Yes. Very bad business. Lots of fun, not great business.
Wrong message, by the way.
Wrong message. Okay. Wrong message.
Wine journalism is a good business,
yes,
though, right?
Definitely, okay. And wine advertising.
Right.
So I grew up in Israel. I actually was born in the U.S. My parents moved to Israel when I was a kid, and grew up in a relatively dry household. Parents didn't drink. There was basically no alcohol in our house. I think there were a couple bottles of 777 brandy. Probably dating myself by that. However, my father only ever made kiddush on wine. We never made kiddush on grape juice for halachic reasons. And at the time, I think in Israel it was the King David Concord was the wine of choice for that. Mm-hmm. Very sweet. And my dad's idea of drinking was he would have a shot of amaretto once a year for somebody's yahrzeit or birthday. And when I was 16, one of my dad's employees came to Seder with one of the first bottles of Kosher Bordeaux. So that was 32 years ago, and I loved it. And it was the first time I'd ever had dry red wine in my life, and I really liked it. And the guest, my dad's employee, was a little bit of a hippie. My dad's very straight-laced, and I think she got a lot of personal enjoyment out of utzing my father and annoying him, and this developed into a primary way for her to do that by encouraging my interest in alcohol and wine, and which she did. And I started to go to a wine store in Yerushalayim, in downtown Yerushalayim, called Avi Ben. Not a lot of 16-year-old kids were wandering into wine stores back in the 90s. And Avi Ben himself, who subsequently opened a number of different stores and stopped working at that specific store, really took me under his wing. And every Friday there were tastings, and the underage drinking was not really a thing in Israel, where you could buy cigarettes at 6. And really taught me about wine. And I started to go to these tastings that they would run. And at some point before I graduated high school, I kind of hooked up with Daniel Rogov, who was the then and to date probably the preeminent Israeli wine critic. And he and a group of folks used to go actually visit wineries. And they allowed me to tag along. I was by far the youngest member of the group, the only religious member of the group. But I really learned a lot. We went to different wineries and really started learning about wine. I was a pretty big nerd at the time, still am. And this was like something I could really sink my teeth into, and just really developed an interest in it over the years. At some point, started branching out into food as well. Really started to develop an interest in food, and we used to go to restaurants and used to write little reviews of them and send them out to a couple friends and family and things like that. And over the years, you become, as many people who are into wine know, you become the kind of the go-to person in your community, of your friends, who when people want to know something about wine, they just ask you.
I had no idea, by the way, this started in high school, pre-college. I assumed this was a college thing. I had no idea you were underage drinking.
Yeah, not condoning it, definitely.
But this also was not your primary job at any point. Is that correct?
Wine is never, and will never be I don't want to say will never, because you never know, but to date, wine has never been anything other than a hobby. Some might say borderline, if not more than that, obsession. But it's never been a professional career. I've never taken money for it. I've never engaged in a business-related aspects of it. But by virtue of having spent immeasurable amount of time for the last 32 years in the kosher wine industry, I only drink and taste and write about kosher wines. I certainly have a significant awareness and understanding of the wonderful world of kosher wine, both on the business, strategic marketing, and obviously winemaking side of things. But no, it has never been a professional thing. And,
so can I interrupt you and say, what is your primary career? And I heard recently that you have made a large move from Manhattan across the river, the Hudson, to Teaneck. Can you tell us about that also?
So my day job is that of a corporate attorney. I've been a practicing attorney for 20 odd years. I practiced for a couple of years in Israel, mostly venture capital and other private transactional work. And I hadn't gotten to that in my story, but since we moved to the U.S., I've practiced at a number of major law firms, also doing private equity, family office, transactional work, and things like that. Not a 9-to-5 job that leaves a lot of time for personal endeavors or hobbies. But like most things, if you're interested enough in it and you make time for the things that are important to you. I have 5 kids. I don't really know what they do most of the day because most of my time is spent on wine. That was a joke. But I do spend a lot of time on wine outside of my day job.
I've always been impressed, by the way. I've never understood it. That's the mystery of Yossie Horwitz, is how you've been able to keep a day job and do all that you're doing. So
to answer Elizabeth's question, yes, that will come in the story. I'm going to delay an answer to your question just to round up the story of me.
Okay.
And so I started getting, over the years I developed this expertise, and it's something that you can continuously learn about. As you all know, Elizabeth, wine is a rabbit hole of endless proportions, and you can always learn more and more about the subject. And I effectively kind of grew up in the world of kosher wine as the world of kosher wine evolved. I was kind of there almost from the beginning of its real manifestations, and really have grown with the world and seen kind of from its real beginnings till the exponential growth that it's seen over the last probably decade, and even more so in the last couple of years. When I was 30, we moved to the U.S. for my oldest son was born very early, had a lot of special needs, and we moved to the U.S. For medical reasons, and that was when I started writing my newsletter in 2004. When, before that I had kind of been, I used to send a lot of emails, I answered a lot of questions, but in 2004, right before Pesach, I had moved here. I had a lot of friends in the U.S. despite having grown up in Israel for the prior 25 years, and all of them knew that I knew about wine, and now I was here and could answer, questions about the wines that were available in the U.S., because especially back then, there were a lot of wines that were only available in Israel, so a lot of the stuff that I would drink or taste or talk about was not necessarily widely available in the U.S. But by the time I had moved here, so I used to get a lot of questions. And then after answering 50, 60, 100 emails of people who had written to me that Erev Pesach, like, what wine should I buy for the Seder, what was this, I decided that it was not an efficient use of my time. And I decided to create a newsletter. And, back in the day, I used just Gmail, and I put 200 friends and family in BCC, and sent out my first newsletter with the intention of writing about 4 wines every week. I was going to write about 2 whites and 2 reds. Even back then, I was very into white, unlike most of the mass market kosher wine consumers, and started sending out. And that was it. And that was kind of how it started. And it just started basically spamming friends and family using BCC on Gmail, and that continued for a couple of years. it slowly grew from 200 to 400 to 500 to 6, over the years. And at some point, when I hit 500 members, that's the most you can use, or at least at the time was the most you could put in a BCC. So I was forced to switch to Google Groups, and that continued for many years. And the growth of the newsletter, as far as its membership, which is around 11,000 members today, really is reflects the trajectory of the growth of the kosher wine world. Because in the first couple of years, I would add 100, 200 subscribers a year, whereas in the last, there was a big growth kind of pre-COVID, and the few years right before COVID, where the growth was 2,000 to 3,000 people every year were signing up and sticking and not leaving. How many of them actually read it? I don't know. I know how many people open it. That's the extent of the Big Brother spying that my current server does. Yes.
What is the name of this magical newsletter?
So the newsletter is not, unfortunately my creative limits were expunged by the writing itself, and it's simply called, the newsletter itself is called Yossie's Wine Recommendations.
Creative.
And the reason it's called, and my kind of wine education forum, there's a website, Twitter, and various social media things, is overall just called Yossie's Corkboard. Again, not the most inventive of things, but the reason it's called Yossie's Wine Recommendations is because while I do taste almost every kosher wine every year, something that's gotten much harder as the number of wines every year has grown beyond 5,000 wines a year, I only write about wines that I would recommend. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that I only write about wines that I personally enjoy or would buy, but I only write about wines that I think are good. Right? Everybody's tastes are different. Wine is definitely a subjective thing, as you guys definitely know, because I repeat this quite often. You should only drink the wines that you like, unless it's the Bartenura Blue Moscato bottle, which you should never drink. We're going to edit that out probably because they're probably a big advertiser, but I got to call it. I say it how it is, and that's just a little joke. But as a general matter, I really only write and recommend wines that I would suggest. So any wine that I've written about in my hundreds of newsletters over the years is a wine that I would be okay if somebody brought it to me as a gift for Shabbos, if somebody served it to me, what have you.
And then thank you very much for that very complete answer, Yossi.
Okay.
We wanted to ask you whether you have moved across the river.
Yes. So okay. So I moved to the U.S. back in 2004. We moved to the city, to Manhattan, where there was a fantastic school for my child, and we lived there for the last 18 years. In an apartment, I have 5 children and a dog. My kids range in age from 21 to 4. And when COVID started, the apartment, which used to feel very large and spacious, had outdoor space and other nice things, suddenly started to feel a lot less spacious. And a family member had an empty house in Englewood, offered it to us during COVID, and we moved out there. And once my kids and myself got a taste of the outdoors and space, it was going to be very hard to put the genie back in the bottle, and we began to realize that our time in the city had pretty much come to an end. We spent 2 years commuting our kids back to the city for school, but ultimately decided that Teaneck was going to be the best place for our children, and moved to Teaneck about 1.5 years ago, and finally settled into our own house a few months ago.
Very nice. So welcome to Teaneck, first of all. That's exciting. Let's move on to the Jewish Link Wine Guide and its precursor, which we are allowed to mention, the Jewish Week, which stopped printing during the COVID year. And so I guess, could you tell us, sort of from your perspective, what that transition was like?
Transition from
the Jewish Week
to the Jewish Link.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to try and do this without offending anyone.
It's a good question, right?
It's not, really my forte. But so as you said, I probably 15 years ago, I am friendly with Michael Dorff, the owner of City Winery, who happens to be on the board of the Jewish Week, and he asked me to start this wine guide for the Jewish week in advance of Pesach, to blindly taste a bunch of wines and come up with some recommendations for Pesach. And the original, there were a couple of judges. Michael was one of them. I was another. Ilan Toker, Zichrono Livracha, was another one. and I think there were one or two other judges at the time, and we did launch to a big fanfare because the New York Times happens to have this this feature in their Sunday paper called in Metropolitan called A Day in the Life of, and they interview and showcase various people, and they happened to be showcasing Michael Dorf the day that we were doing the tastings in the winery. So actually that was my first time ever being in the paper for my wine things was in the New York Times. This is obviously a significant upgrade, so thank you for offering me that opportunity.
You're welcome.
But so we did that for 10 years and kind of every year improved and adjusted and made a lot of changes to improve the quality of the judging, the quality of the rankings. And there was always a lot of give and take between myself, who, while not a career professional of wine at this point, would probably be fair to deem myself a professional wine writer or critic, and the commercial needs of the paper and the other panelists who were less well-versed in judging and tasting wines. But we did together manage to, over the years, improve it, and I think it provided a real service to the community. Erev Pesach, coming out with a list of wines that a panel of peers, however you define that, had chosen. And like you said, the Jewish Week unfortunately went out of print. Unfortunately,
3 years.
Unfortunately, depending on who you ask. And having had a long time relationship with both of you, was happy to help relaunch the endeavor under a new banner, and as we did with the Jewish Week, have spent the last 2 or 3 years consistently tinkering and improving. And I think it as you realized, it's a consistently in motion, and we're always working to improve it. But the main shift, I guess, was it's a little closer to my house now to come and taste the wines, and it's a set panel of judges, unlike at the Jewish Week where there was a constant change. I was the constant. I was the judge for every one of the 10 issues. I was the founding judge there as well. But here we seem to have kind of settled on a more or less consistent base of panelists. I don't know if you have if that answers your question.
1 second, Can I just say, why is it that all the other judges are afraid of you, Yossi?
I don't know if that's nice or bad to hear. I think in general I tend to be somewhat opinionated and don't really spend a lot of time worrying about what comes out of my mouth. I think that in general I'm a nice guy. I like people, but and if you know me, you know me, and sometimes I'm not as careful with what I say as other people are, but we're going to strike that. I tend to say what I think, and never intend to upset or offend anyone, and therefore I'm less conscientious of whether it may actually be offensive or a thing. I tend to rely on the fact that that's not my intention, and kind of go with that. I think that, I don't know about necessarily this panel of judges, all of whom are people I consider my good friends. So, without being specific about this group of people, I think that, I do tend to know more about wines, kosher wines tasting than most people, at least certainly in the kosher wine world, and that may give more gravitas or weight to my thoughts or opinions, and therefore when I express one, others may find it difficult to contradict or argue with me. I don't know if that's a pretty politically correct answer for me. But I don't know if that was the answer you were looking for.
I'll just say this. Yossi has always been, over the years, was always very careful to make sure that pieces that we put in the paper were, especially wine related, they were coming from, that making sure that the sourcing was correct, and he was on my case to making sure, hey Moshe, there's a divide between, hey, what's really an advertisement, what's really independent, and he actually made us a little more sensitive to that stuff.
Well, I do think, I really view my job in the world. I do it for my own, I obviously don't get money for it. I do it for my own personal enjoyment. It's something that I truly love and like learning about, like doing. I travel, I go around the world, I meet a lot of interesting people, and quite frankly, for my day job, it's quite an efficient icebreaker. When you go to a meeting or a conference and there's mingling going on, when people ask you what you do and you tell them you're a lawyer, that's pretty much the end of the conversation. Nobody really wants to talk to you about what you do. But if you tell them I write about wine, or I make wine, or I taste wine, that's a much more interesting topic of conversation, and has definitely helped me professionally with networking and business development and things like that as well. Not why I do it. The main reason I do it is about education. It's something that I love. I think wine is an integral part should be an integral part of everyone's life. Certainly as an observant Jew, it's intertwined in pretty much every religious observant act that we do, except maybe fast days. And I think, it's an elevated beverage, and it's a beverage that we believe has a level of kedusha to it. And it's also a beverage that brings people together. You don't hear a lot of people, getting together over a bottle of Coca-Cola, but over a bottle of wine, it's a social lubricant that I think, especially in this day and age of craziness where everybody's focusing on, what makes them different and how much everybody hates each other. I think the ability to get together over a bottle of wine and exchange ideas and opinions in a civilized motion, I think, in a civilized way, I think wine is a tremendous thing. And, I view my job as educating people about it and encouraging people to drink more, not underage and not to excess, obviously, but to incorporate wine, into their daily lives. And that, is something that I think I've been relatively successful about, including through, the Rosh Chodesh Club, which we can get to.
I want to just segue to that. I was saying, you were talking about holy, talking about that kind of, that marriage of, hey, not drinking to excess, kind of, looking at it as actually something that's even quasi-holy. I've been hearing about this club for years, this Rosh Chodesh Club. And I was told I should try to wrangle an invitation to it. I still have not made it yet to one of them. But let's hear about this semi-famous or famous Rosh Chodesh Club.
Okay, so there's I did kind of riff the idea from someone else. So I want to give credit where credit's due. But every wine collector knows of the problem, so to speak, that they have all these wines that they have curated over the years that are special to them, that have value, not necessarily monetary value, but emotional value or collector's value or rarity or what have you. And wine is really much better and more fun shared with friends. Sitting alone in your house drinking a bottle of wine has its advantages, has its moments, as I'm sure many of us explored specifically over COVID. But really sharing wine with friends is mega enhances the experience. And I think that and I found myself as someone who's been collecting wine for quite some time and who has, a rather extensive collection of interesting wines. Come Friday, as I prepare for Shabbos, I would find myself opening and closing the drawers in my wine fridge, looking for a bottle that made sense to serve, and consistently rejecting bottles that I did not feel the people coming would appreciate. It wasn't that I didn't want to share with them, but I felt like if I have a special bottle, sharing it with someone who doesn't understand it or appreciate it kind of diminishes the enjoyment of it. And my Shabbos circle of friends in the city was not necessarily the same as my wine circle of friends, and there were very few people with whom I kind of socialized on a regular basis who also appreciate these wines. And I constantly found myself depriving myself of my own wines on Shabbos, which is the day, the holiest day of the week, and the day where, sitting back and relaxing with a bottle of wine makes the most sense, and not enjoying it because I didn't have anybody to enjoy it with. And so there's a concept called Open That Bottle Night that the former wine writers of the Wall Street Journal came up with, which was intended to solve this problem, which is one day a year. Wine lovers around the world get together and everybody brings a special bottle of wine, and it's that Open That Bottle Night. It's that night that was manufactured to create an event, the right event to open that bottle that you've been saving forever. And so as I was doing, as I was week after week kind of going through my wines, an idea came to me, but I'm not sure why the wine writers at the Wall Street Journal thought that one night a year would suffice for this problem. And I decided to incorporate, as you were saying, the concept of Rosh Chodesh, which is a Yom Tov and is an opportunity for rebirth and an opportunity for introspection, and a way to celebrate, but as a way to celebrate it, not just by saying Hallel, but by getting together with friends and wine. And again, as most of the wine-related endeavors that I've started over the years, this started in the same way. Put together an emailed a bunch of my friends, mostly in the city, but also in the 5 towns, in Teaneck, other places in Bergen County, Riverdale, anywhere within, I'd say, an hour driving distance or even an hour and a half. I said, listen, here's what I'm doing. I have 10 spots, which, I have 10 spots. Bring a bottle of wine. It's got to be 7 years past vintage, and we're going to get together and drink some wines. Drink some special wines. And it was in my house. I didn't know where this was going. It was limited to 10 people because that was kind of honestly how many people my dining room table could comfortably fit. And I felt like if people were going to bring special wines, when you divide a wine bottle by more than 10, you're kind of limited to an unsatisfactory amount of wine. And I felt like people might feel gypped, if they brought a special bottle and had to share it with 15 people. It also felt like, it was the number of people that could fit on the table and socialize properly. And I wanted it to be a fun experience. Food was really not intended to be part of this at all. For the first, and I really went out to Kosher Marketplace, which was across the street, bought a couple of deli wraps, a couple of chicken nuggets, and thought that was going to be that. And it was a great success. And one of the greatest parts of its success was a good friend of mine, Yedidya Cohn, who at the time was a relatively just home kind of amateur chef, but a good friend of mine from the wine world. And he called me up a couple days before. He's like, "Listen, I've got these ribs. I've been sous videing them for a couple days. I barely knew what sous vide was back then. This was 10 years ago. Do you mind if I bring them?" I'm like, "Sure, bring them." And he brought these 72-hour sous vide back ribs to where everybody got 2 ribs, and nobody ate anything else. I mean, these were literally the best piece of meat I'd had to that point in my life, and nobody ate any of the other food until all the ribs were gone. And it was a great event. We had some amazing wines, and at that point we thought maybe we should do, and that's kind of how it started. I could really talk about the RCC for quite some time. It's really a baby of mine, and it's something that has evolved. But Yedidya was really instrumental in making it popular with his incredible cooking, and he cooked for about 2 years, and every week kind of outdid himself to the point that we had 24-course tasting dinners at these wine dinners, and truly amazing foods, and really broadened, I think, everybody's view of kosher cooking, in addition to the amazing wines that we were having every week. And this was more special because while the wines we were drinking were made by other people, the food we were eating was literally made by Yedidya in his house in Long Island, and brought an hour and a half to my house in Manhattan in the sous vide containers and in warming drawer, literally in his car every week. And it was really quite amazing. And then I think at some point he just decided it was too much, called me up and said, "I'm done." And massive panic attack ensued by me, because all these people were really at that point coming, if not at least for as much for the food, probably even more for the food than for the wine. And while I had dabbled in cooking in the past and enjoyed food, I really didn't know what I was doing.
But wait, can we just... The food it's fascinating to me that the food was not even part of the original intent, because now the idea has been copied in multiple cities all over the world, including Renana, San Diego, London.
So there are about 32 different franchises around the world of this concept. The rules,
Wow.
As a corporate attorney, I came up with a very rigid set of rules that made sense for me and for the demographic that I was catering to in the city. There's obviously an older demographic, slightly, maybe a little bit, more access to older and maybe even more expensive wines. I have about 180 or 190 people on my list. And, there were 9 spots available every week, 8 when Yedidya was cooking, because both he and I took 2 of the spots. But it has evolved over the years, and like I said, there are 32 franchises around the world. There's franchises in Paris. London is a major one. Miami is another one. Strasbourg. There are a couple in Israel. There are multiple ones in the United States. There's Teaneck. There's Englewood, West Orange. The one place where we've had difficulty maintaining one is the Five Towns, and really, while the rules, so to speak, differ from venue to venue, they generally involve 10 to 12 people getting together. Everybody brings a bottle of wine, and there is a food aspect of it which has become integral to the enjoyment of the events. But what it really has created is similar to the fact that being like we know that being Orthodox is almost like belonging to the world's greatest fraternity. Anywhere in the world you go, if they're Orthodox Jews, you're kind of going to be have people. So the RCC has really created a significant sense of community among wine lovers around the world, with various members of different RCCs traveling the world and joining other RCCs and mingling with those people. And really significant and lifelong friendships have been created, over these RCC dinners. The other thing that I think it's really helped, and this is from the aspect of wine education, is when I first started, there was a very small, limited group of people who were aging their wines and really understood that there are wines that you buy today and you store professionally, or at least with the right temperature and humidity for 8 to 10 to 12 years before you can really enjoy them in their fullest. This was really a concept that was not well known or well utilized by many, and over the last 8 years, it's really penetrated mainstream, kosher wine consumers' thought process, where people buy wines, if not for the purpose of bringing them to an RCC, but for the purpose of aging them, and it's something that's really the RCC has brought to the forefront. And really, other than my children, if you ask me what is the thing that I am most proud of to date, it is probably the creation of and the expansion of the RCC throughout the world.
That's exciting.
Any plans for you guys all to get together for the big RCC gathering?
So people have suggested, having an RCC of the RCC hosts and things like that. There's a lot of plans underway. I also, as a hobby, do make my own wine here and there, and have an annual dinner for people who participate in that. And at some point, with the idea of always reaching higher, there were plans in motion for an 100-course kind of day, like a breakfast, lunch, and dinner showcasing the wines. COVID put an end to that, but I'm hoping to do it, in conjunction with a charity, like Leked or something like that, so that the hedonistic aspect of it will be tempered by positive vibes and doing well.
Tell us a little bit about you making your own wine. I've known you've been doing your own wine. I see you walking in and out of the office carrying boxes sometimes. I know some of your customers. How do you?
So they're not really customers. It was really just the next evolution of being involved in the wine world, was to be a creator. As you'll see in the article that I wrote for the Jewish Wine Guide about professional winemakers, who are, many of them have their own kind of wine projects that enables them to kind of have their creative process be their own and not be subject to any other requirements. That was a little bit about what I was getting to. I wanted to allow winemakers the opportunity to make the wines that they wanted to make, as opposed to the wines that they felt that they had to make money or to satisfy the public. And so I got together with a bunch of different winemakers, and I said, let's make a personal blend that expresses kind of your winemaking philosophy. I will cover all the costs up front, so you don't have to worry about it. The wine will be pre-sold. We'll make it together, and we'll blend it together. And basically, I created a chabura of people who everybody kind of contributes their portion, their share of the financial things up front to a bunch of winemakers, and the winemaker basically makes private wine for a group of people. This is, again, when I started this 8 or 9 years ago, it wasn't it wasn't that common. Pretty much nobody else was doing this. A lot of people make private label wines, which is you go to a winery and you say, instead of having your label on it, put my label on it and I'll call it my own wine. These are standout, unique wines that are made by the winery and myself, by the winemaker and myself, solely for our group. The winemaker doesn't even get any bottles of it. They usually, come to my dinner and get to taste their own wine there. But again, it's not a commercial thing. I lose money on this. It's not a business. It's not, the wine's not sold anywhere. You can't buy it anywhere. You kind of have to be part of our chabura, and it's pretty limited.
It's a real labor of love.
It's definitely an obsession. But again, it's fun. I travel around the world. I hang out with the people I like. I make wine. It's not it takes a lot of effort, but I wouldn't consider it work.
Well, but what would you, if money was no object, or if there was no limitation on travel or time, what kinds of wines would you bring to the kosher world that we don't have? What other improvements could we perhaps put into our sites that might really be, someone listening might say, hey, that's a good idea, I want to taste that.
So if you look at my newsletter over the years, there's always been kind of the holy grail, so to speak, to borrow from a non-Jewish terminology, of wines in the kosher world that existed in the non-kosher world that weren't in the kosher world. For many years it was Pinot Noir, which there were a number of Israeli wineries making Pinot Noir, a number of California wineries making kosher Pinot Noir, but it really wasn't Burgundy, which is considered kind of the epitome of what Pinot Noir is supposed to be. Topic for another time, and that's been brief. Now there's 20 or 30 different Burgundy wines being made kosher. Some of them fantastic. And then there was German Riesling, which was made for a couple of years, but the difficulty of selling German wines to Jews is not something that is surprising. And Italian wine was another kind of genre that was underutilized, for many reasons. Mostly it was complicated for the consumer to understand. It was complicated to make. It was very broken up. And, the last couple of years, primarily driven by by Ralph Madeb, who's one of the partners in M&M Importers, has made a tremendous breakthrough and brought many, many fabulous Italian wines to market, along with, some of the other imported distributors like Royal Wine and Allied. So over the years, it keeps getting better. And, with the Jewish need for consistently to have change and something new, which is not necessarily a good thing in the wine world, right? I mean, some of these French chateaus make the same wine, the same plots for 700 years. Whereas in Israel, the primary question that a winemaker or winery gets asked is what's new, which is probably devastating for a winemaker. But the constant need to evolve and grow. And listen, the kosher wine industry is relatively in its infancy, right? It's not yet mainstream. It's not yet there. It happens to be unique because of the religious aspects of it that we're using. That basically every kosher observing family needs wine, whether it's for Seder or for Shabbos or whatever. There is a touch of alcohol, again, on a Kedusha level, on a holiness level, in every home. So your base point is that literally every person who keeps kosher is a potential consumer of kosher wine, which makes it a very unique and different market than any other wine market in the world, and something that can make for very interesting business and strategic thought process. But Madeira, there's no kosher Madeira, which is, my cousin. I have a cousin who consistently asks me to make a Madeira, and there are many wineries whose wines I would love to taste, like Chateau de Cam or Romani Conti in Burgundy, who don't make kosher wines. And while Royal Wine and other have been very good at convincing more and more high-end wineries to create kosher versions of these wines, there's a lot of growth in that area that could still to come, and hopefully it will happen in the near future.
Okay.
I'm sure you get asked this, but what would you give to the average, to the masses, so to speak, who aren't as well versed? What would give me like kind of an elevator pitch? How should they kind of like grow in their interest in wine? The short pitch, so to speak.
So the short pitch is to try new things. Don't be scared of new things, and always try new things. And to understand that while sweet or sweeter wines are easier to understand and to enjoy, they aren't really wines. And I'm not talking about wines that are made to be sweet purposely, dessert wines like port or Sauterne or ice wine or things like that. I'm talking about the wines that are still the most widely consumed wines, semi-sweet wines or things, Moscato, Jeunesse, things like that, which I view as gateway wines. They provide a very positive aspect of wine education because they get people from drinking soda, cocktails, or other, various types of alcohol, none of which I consume. I have a monogamous relationship with wine. Pretty much that, water, and coffee are the only things I drink. But they are gateway wines, but they're only gateway wines if you go through the gateway. So if you find yourself drinking Jeunesse or Moscato or things like that, like try a slightly drier wine. Like go to your wine store, email me or ask me or ask your local wine expert, whoever that person may be, to recommend a wine that is going to be perceived as sweet, that's fruitier, that's fresher, less oaked, that's going to provide you with the same sensations as a sweeter wine, but isn't actually sweet. And try and move into slightly more sophisticated wines. The best advice I can give to people is, if you enjoy a wine, take a picture of the label, because it's very unhelpful to ask your local wine expert, whoever that may be, oh, I had this great wine on Shabbos, it had a white label, or it had a blue line through it. 25 years ago, I could have told you exactly what that wine was with that amount of information. With 5,000 or more wines these days, it's very hard to do that. And if you have something you like, you're going to want to try it again. Take a picture, and that way you'll know. Or take a picture of every wine you try, and only keep the pictures of the wines that you like. The other thing is, try to taste two wines at the same time. Now, I don't mean pour two wines into the same glass. I mean, try two wines in two different glasses and taste them side by side. And try and, for yourself, you don't have to tell anybody, you don't have to show it to anybody, but for yourself, try and articulate in a word or 2 words what's different about them and what you like better about one or the other. I have yet to meet someone who, everybody I know who, no, let me rephrase that. Many people I know will come out and say, I don't know anything about wine, I like this, I like that. And I say to them, I said, you'd be shocked at how much you actually know about wine. And try this. Pour 2 wines into 2 glasses and taste them side by side and try and articulate for yourself what the differences are. You will be shocked at how much you know about these 2 wines just by doing that exercise. When you drink 1 wine over the course of a Shabbos meal, it's very hard to remember what it was other than the fact that it tasted good.
Yeah.
But when you taste 2 or 3 or more, but start with 2, and that is the best way to learn about wine.
Well, thanks so much. We really have to run because we have to finish
The wine guide.
the wine guide, which is almost done and is going to be in people's newspapers in
March 23rd.
Yeah, March 23rd.
Oh wow, that's soon.
It's very soon. We have to finish it up, send it to print, but thanks for being with us.
My pleasure.
And
thank you for having me. Look forward to doing this again.
great.
Maybe shorter next time.
Yes, thanks for being on our podcast.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us on the Jewish Link Pitch Meeting podcast. If you would like to participate or be in touch with us in any way, please email us at editor@jewishlink.news and follow us and find our podcast wherever you find podcasts.